Hey, ladies and everyone, welcome to a stamp club meeting. And you may hear some voices in the background, and you are part of a wonderful group of today women from, let's see, we're all from North Carolina, but sometimes we have folks from Texas, Iowa, California, Florida. It's an amazing group of ladies. And today we're going to be focused on a very fun technique. It's called partial embossing. And I've got two examples here. They're made with the same embossing folder, the same technique. I am not going to go through a lot of putting the final cards together. This time it's more about how to get this really cool background. And then you're going to have so many things that you're going to be inspired to do with those backgrounds when you have them done. But I just did want to show you a couple. I'll be sort of recreating at least parts of this. I absolutely love this card. It was made primarily with the super cute Playing in the Rain stamp set. And for people who know me well, you know that I'm not always a critter person, but these little critters are too cute to not use. And they make some fabulous, fabulous cards. So as you can see, this one is focused on the cute little turtle and then a couple more stamps that are in the set. But what I want you to notice is when I put my finger across the background, this is one page and you've got the embossing on all the different sides of the card, but in the center, this is absolutely flat. There's no embossing in here. And we're just going to talk about how you can make that on your own. And I'll show you a couple little tips and tricks of how to kind of snazz up a card if you want to do something like that. And then I belong to a group on Facebook. And the challenge that we had this month was to put together a masculine focused card. And I've got trouble. I admit this. I'm not one who creates a lot of masculine focused cards, but that little fox that's in here, I think looks kind of cloak and dagger. It almost looks like a little guy who's a detective in his trench coat, who's out there doing some work. And I'll talk later, but you'll notice that I didn't use the entire stamp when I made that image. And then to make it a little bit more masculine, because my husband was not convinced that this was really masculine, I decided to put something on the inside that would definitely give you the clue that it was masculine. And I use this Alpha Best set. So for those of you who know me, this is really out of character, but here we go. So on the outside, it says happy birthday. And on the inside, it says Foxy Dude. I mean, come on. How is that not masculine? So that is another way that you can put this together using that same technique. So let's just jump in. As I mentioned, what we're going to do today is really talk about how to create a background that has some embossing and some non-embossing. And I'm going to take a shortcut because if I recreated the jig, and this is where we're going, if I recreated that, it's going to take a little bit of time, but I'm going to walk through how to do this. And then more importantly, show you a couple of tips and tricks of how to use this. So the embossing folder that I'm using on the two cards that I just showed you is the Cane Weave 3D embossing folder. It's in the current mini catalog, and it is super, super cool. And what we're going to do is we are going to create a jig, I'll call it a jig, that is going to allow me to put a piece of cardstock into the embossing folder, run it through, and you can see here in the middle, there's no impression. Well, here's why. When we put all of this together, think about how the embossing folder works. When you put it into your machine is adding pressure. And that machine is going to add pressure where the cardboard is. There's going to be a gaping hole, literally, where the cardboard isn't. And that's not going to add pressure to your paper. So where there's no cardboard, there's no impression. So let's talk about how to make this. And as I mentioned, I'm going to shortcut this because number one, I don't want to bore you to tears, and I can demonstrate it by using cardstock. So your imagination is going to be appreciated here. Pretend this is a piece of cardboard. What you're going to do is take a die, and it can be any shape that you want. I tend to use circles, squares, rectangles, triangles, ovals, something that is really common and able to be identified. And you're going to put that on your piece of cardboard and make sure that the cardboard is larger than the piece of paper that you typically put through your embossing folder. So usually the largest I would put through an embossing folder is going to be a quarter sheet, which is 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. So I just made sure that the cardboard is wider than 4 1/4 and taller than 5 1/2, because you want to be able to get that cardstock inside the edges of your cardboard. And what you're going to do is run this through your machine. And in the magic of sort of television, this is what you're going to end up with. And I know this is obvious. You're going to have a piece that has your circle cut out. What I suggest is that you mark the side that you're looking at, because as much as I would have tried, I guarantee you that circle is not in the middle. And then I'm going to take another piece. So again, use your imagination. Pretend that this is a piece of cardboard. And I'm going to put these two pieces together. I'm going to trace where I have that circle, because what I want to be able to do eventually is stack a couple of pieces of cardboard, and we'll talk about some other types of material together in a minute. And then I'm going to take that same die that I used, and I'm going to put that right where I've got the traced circle. I'm going to run that through my die cut machine. And again, through the magic of television, AKA Zoom, I have two pieces. And since I put little A's on both of those, I know that when I put them together, they're going to fit together. And they're going to fit together so that the sides are flush and that hole is also exactly in the same place for both of them. And I can show you, if I turn these around, like if I don't mark them, they're not exactly the same. The hole is actually a little bit further over to my left. So just taking time to mark and make sure you know where these go together is a really good thing to do. When you start making your own jigs, it is going to be a little bit of trial and error, because when we use our own die cutting embossing machines, the give on different machines, different manufacturers, and even within the same manufacturer, you're going to find that some are going to be tighter, some are going to be looser. So you're going to have to work with your own machine to really figure out, do you need two pieces? A lady who is on our call today, rather than using cardboard, used watercolor paper, and actually 4 layers of watercolor paper. And again, that was a little bit of trial and error just to understand how thick this needs to be when you are using it. So cut your shapes, don't throw them out, because we're going to talk about that in a little bit. There's a way that you can use what is the cutout piece. These are the 2 pieces of cardboard that I cut out when I made this. And I'm going to show you in a couple minutes how you can use this for a little different look. So don't throw those away. But where you want to go with this is you want to eventually put those 2 pieces of cardboard together. I glued my 2 pieces together. And then I am going to put that on the outside of my embossing folder. Don't put it on the inside. That would just give you a little too much tension that you would be trying to run your embossing folder through your machine. And essentially, this is going to act almost like a plate on one side of your embossing folder. Now, I did want to show you one little tip and trick that I use when I'm doing this. So you're going to notice that I've got some lines on the cardboard, and these are actually drawn on the cardboard. So if I just peel the tape back, what I did on here is I took a ruler and I measured equidistant on the left side and the right side of that circle. It's kind of arbitrary, but I put a line, you can see those red lines, and I made the color bright enough that I can see it through the embossing folder. And I did it vertically and I did it horizontally. And you may wonder why. Well, when I go to put my paper in and run it through the machine, if I have a circle like this, my goal is to get that circle in the middle of what it is that I'm running through. And it is really hard when you've got your jig sort of taped to your embossing folder. And if I turn that around, and if I take a piece of cardstock, and this is a quarter sheet of cardstock, and if I put it in, if I don't have those lines, they're kind of hard to see with that, with the light shining. But if I don't have those lines where I can see that my corners are hanging over at the same amount on either side, and I don't know how far down I have my paper, I have no idea where that middle is. It's behind that piece of paper. So for me to do my best in trying to get this centered, I'm going to use the corners, and I'm going to try and make sure that each of my corners looks the same when I'm putting that into the embossing folder. And when I'm happy with that, I'm going to go ahead and close the embossing folder. And this is ready to go into the die cut embossing machine. Here's how I suggest that you run something like this through. And that is that you set it so you have the cardboard or whatever you're using on the bottom. I have an old platform. Don't laugh at me. This is ancient, but it still works. And I open it up. If you have this, I would open it up to tab number 1. This is a 3D embossing folder. I would put that right down on my plate. And then I'm going to use a regular size plate, not the embossing plate for a 3D embossing folder. This one is thinner than the 3D embossing folder. And I run that right through the die cut embossing machine. And that is my sandwich. So what's happening here is if I kind of just pull this up and show it to you this way, that cardboard is adding just a little bit more depth, and it's giving me exactly what I need when I'm putting it through so that I will get a really perfect result. And this is what I get. And it's so, so cool because there is nothing, there's absolutely nothing that's been embossed in the area where that hole is. And I love this embossing folder. It just has so much detail. And here you have a choice. You can use the embossed side, or you can use the debossed side. So you can figure out which one you want to use. So what I decided to do on this was I wanted to put an image in the middle. And obvious statement, you need to kind of consider how much room you have for the shape that you've chosen. So this is a really good tool when you are choosing an image. You can actually take that piece and you can look at the images and figure out, for example, I wouldn't be able to use the fox because he's going to stick out no matter how I do that. Or the bunny, it is not going to work. His ears are going to pop out. So I was able to cover up the turtle with no problem. Now, an easier way or another way to do that is you can obviously also take your die and do the same thing and just look and see what images you're going to be able to use. So just be aware of the size of the image that you want to use in the middle of your piece where there is no embossing. And then I have my Stamparatus set up so that if I get my non-embossed area fairly centered, I know where that is going to be when I put it into my Stamparatus. I can just ink up that turtle, put him kind of in the middle, and I'm not really going to worry if it's absolutely perfectly centered because this has so much going on anyway that no one is really going to notice the difference. And then when I have stamped him, he's going to look something like that. So you'll notice if you really, really, really look that it's not exactly in the middle, but honestly, I don't really care that much because it's going to be just fine. So let's talk a little bit about how you can decorate something like this. And the sky is the limit. I thought it would be really fun to do some ink blending. And I definitely wanted to play on the colors of the sky because I knew I was going to bring in some flowers. And balmy blue is just a beautiful, beautiful color to use if you want to do some sky kind of scenery. And this particular embossing folder, I think, does a beautiful job when you are using ink blending. It has so much detail, as I've mentioned, that it really captures the pattern without having to use a lot of ink. And balmy blue lately has been one of my favorites. I think this would also make a really, really cute baby card. And, you know, you could add pink to this piece that I'm doing now with the ink blending if you wanted it to be a little bit more feminine. And I think blue would obviously be great for a little boy. But it works on really easily. And one thing that I'm not going to do a lot of is I'm not going to try and get a lot of ink in the middle. I'm going to allow the saturation of the color to be on the outside and for the eye to kind of take in that middle piece without adding a lot of color. So I can literally leave it about like that. I can go back later if I want to add maybe just a touch more right in there. But it's very simple to add some really nice focal color and not take away from the beauty of what is going on in the middle. And you'll see that that kind of allows your eye to just trail in and see where the embossing ends. And it's very, very, very pretty. I decided to do a couple of different coloring techniques, and I want to show you the one that I did first, and then I'll show you where I ended up. This is one that I was playing with initially, and this was done with markers and some of the different color inks. I haven't finished it. I'm actually going to go back in and use some of the watercolor pencils because I'll be able to blend in some of these colors. And this was more of an experiment on my part. Many, many ways to color. You could leave it even blank if you wanted to, but this is one with markers. You can use the blends, and you can also use what I ended up with, which are the watercolor pencils. And for something that is, for me, the size of this image I really enjoy the watercolor pencils. I think they do a fabulous job with some of the blending that we have in this. And I'm just going to bring that up a little bit closer because there's a lot of different colors and different layers. And it was a lot of fun to work with this and to use some of the watercolor pencils. And it's the right size, I think. I wouldn't tackle anything that's much, much bigger because it can take a little bit of time. But I really like the way that the watercolor pencils help me to get some of that blending done. And the other piece that I did for this card, which is one of the stamps that is in the set, and it's a very, very fun one. It's a collection of flowers, and it is one stamp. So this is what the stamp looks like. And what I ended up doing is I stamped quite a few of those flowers. And then I went in with my watercolor pencils. So I went in and I made some just different colors with those. And you're going to see the remnants of what I did and also some experimentation. I've been having fun just sort of experimenting to see what I think looks good and what maybe I can tweak a little bit. So I stamped several of these and I cut them out. There is a corresponding die set that comes with the stamps. And there's this really cool die right here that cuts out the flowers. So I just cut a bunch of those out and I started playing. And what's really nice is if you're into fussy cutting, you can fussy cut some of these single flowers out if you want to. And you'll see that I have, like I said, the leftover bits of what I did. And I just kind of tucked these together and glued them so there's a little bit of a garden down here. And then there's a super, super cute stamp, the Oh Happy Day. And I decided I wanted to do something just a little different with that. So I did drag out one more stamp die set. This is the Something Fancies die. And I used this little hexagon and cut that out. So I stamped the Oh Happy Day. Cut that out. You can see that I've done this in two different ways. So two different ways that you can do that. And then I cut two more of the hexagons. Die cut those out in black. And you can very easily just put those right behind your sentiment and just give it a little bit of a pop so you can see that on the front of the card. So that's what I did right there. And then some of my fussy cut flowers ended up in the upper left-hand corner. And of course, a little bit of bling, the rhinestones. The black matte is what I chose to put behind just so that I could bring out some of the really black elements that I have throughout. I thought that really brought it back cohesively. So that's one way to use the Playing in the Rain set and the partial embossing with the Cane Weave 3D embossing folder. I just want to show you one other one, and then I'll bring back the first example. So this was the other card that I showed you just a few minutes ago. And there's no difference in the technique. This is absolutely the exact same thing that I did. You can see this is on color cardstock versus the white cardstock. And on the blending, I used two colors. I used the Balmy Blue, and I also used some Crumb Cake because I wanted to get it a little bit darker and a little bit more of a foxy tone. The Happy Birthday is from the Artistically Inked stamp set. It's just a beautiful font. And I wanted to have a couple of borders. So this is simply a piece of balmy blue cardstock that's cut to 1/4 inch wide, and then a little bit of basic white that's cut to 1/8 of an inch wide. Made a little ribbon, and then down here, pretty much the same thing. And then use some of the metallic brush dots to show that. And what I wanted to show you was the difference between how I stamped the images in the middle for these two cards. And it's very obvious. It's just worth spending 2 seconds on. So the entire image was stamped on this card using the Stamparatus. For this image, I didn't want the umbrella. I wanted him to, again, look a little bit more cloak and dagger, you know, like he really is out there doing some detective work, and he didn't need his umbrella. So the way that I did that was I did put him on my Stamparatus because I did want to make sure that I was going to have the ability to stamp the image a few times. But when I did that, I used my marker, and I was very, very careful. Use the brush end, and this is a basic black marker. So I went in, and where those umbrella lines are, I just made sure that I did not put any ink on those. And that gave me this sweet little fox without his umbrella. But everything else in terms of the technique for doing the partial embossing is exactly the same. Paper's cut to a little bit different dimension. And then, as I mentioned, the Foxy Dude, that just makes me chuckle. The Foxy Dude is done with the Alpha Best set, and I actually used a little block and just did those kind of freehand. So when you have your jigs, when you have everything set up, let's kind of go back and look at where we were when we did our jig. And if you remember, when you make yours, you're going to have some pieces that are cut out. And as I said, don't throw them away, because what you can do is you can use this as a jig when you put this through your embossing machine. So let's think about that for a sec. If I have a piece of paper in this embossing folder, and let's say that I put the cardboard pieces, the circle cardboard pieces, on my embossing folder, and if I taped it down like this, and I run it through my embossing machine, what should happen is where that cardboard is where I'm going to get the embossed impression. And where it isn't, I'm going to get a blank. That's exactly what happens. So here's a piece that I ran through that has the circle. And you can see that where that circle was is where the embossing is happening. And where the circle wasn't, there is no embossing. So this is also a piece that I can use on another project, and I can dress that up to be exactly what I want. There are some of these jigs that are available on the commercial market. They're made from a kind of a heavy plastic, come in different shapes. They are wonderful, and you can definitely use them for the same kind of project that we're talking about here. But you also have the freedom to make any shape that you want. And don't get hung up. If you don't have a die that's the shape that you want, that's all right. Trace the shape that you want to cut out. You can cut it out with an X-Acto knife. You could cut it out with a pair of scissors. It's okay if you use a pair of scissors and you cut into the cardboard and then cut your shape out, because when you put everything back together, that little place where you made the cut, you're going to be putting it back in the same place where it originally was. So you can still use it as a jig. So you can make squares, triangles, stars. The sky is the limit. And I really hope that you give this a try. And when you make these jigs, save them. I'm going to be able to use this many, many, many times. and I can use it with many different embossing folders. So I am simply going to take it off of this embossing folder. I have my tape there, and I can just peel it right off. Fold that tape over, and this is now going to go into my stash with my embossing folders, and I'll be able to use it again. I really hope you give this a try. It is a ton of fun. And when you see how easy it is to get a really, really cool and different kind of look using your embossing folders, a piece or two of cardboard, and your imagination, you're going to make some amazing cards. And I think you're going to impress the people that you send them to, because again, it's going to be one of those, how in the world was that done? So I'd love to see what you make. Hope you enjoy it, and happy stamping.